A man lost his job on a Friday afternoon, his truck broke down on a Sunday, and by the following Wednesday, he was sleeping in a Tim Hortons parking lot in Sudbury, Ontario, with his 11-year-old daughter in the back seat. He didn't call his brother. He didn't call his ex-wife. He didn't call anyone. On the 8th night, a woman knocked on his window, but it wasn't for the reason he expected. Owen Darcy was 43 years old. He worked as a heavy equipment operator for Carlington Mining Services out of Sudbury for 11 years. 5 days a week, sometimes 6, he drove a 777 haul truck across open pit terrain, moving rock and ore through wind that could strip paint off a vehicle in winter. He earned $28.40 an hour. Not wealthy, but solid. Enough to cover a 2-bedroom apartment on Larch Street, a used F-150 with 210,000 kilometers on it, groceries that included name-brand cereal, and a savings account that hovered around $1,400 depending on the month. He had one daughter. Bryn was 11. She was the kind of kid who read instruction manuals for fun and corrected adults when they misused the word literally. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's tendency to go quiet when something was wrong, to sit with a problem the way other people sit with a cup of tea, turning it over without speaking. She had lived with Owen full-time for 2 years, since her mother, Laurel, moved to Kelowna for a relationship that didn't last and left a custody arrangement that nobody had gotten around to legally formalizing. Bryn carried things she never talked about. She'd learned early that her father carried enough already. The layoff came without warning. Carlington lost its provincial environmental permit after a tailings leak the previous spring. The site was suspended pending review. 47 workers were let go on a Friday in late October. Owen received a record of employment, a handshake from the site supervisor, and a cardboard box for his locker. He drove home on the Trans-Canada with the heat broken in the F-150 and the box rattling around the back. He had 17 days to figure out the next thing before rent came due. He found 2 prospects, a mining contractor in Timmins and a road construction crew operating out of Elliott Lake. The Timmins position went to someone with a Class A license. The Elliott Lake crew called back twice, then stopped answering. He applied to 6 other postings. He heard back from none of them. The truck died on a Sunday evening in a Canadian Tire parking lot on LaSalle Boulevard. The mechanic at the counter told him the transmission had gone. $1,200 minimum, parts and labor, and that was if they could source the components locally. Owen had $340 left in his account. He stood in the parking lot for a long time. Then he went back to the apartment, packed what he could carry for himself and Bryn, and told her they were going to stay at a friend's place for a while. Bryn looked at him. She was 11. She knew what a friend's place looked like when her father said it, and his jaw went tight at the same time. She packed her backpack without asking questions. Owen's older brother, Craig, lived in North Bay, 3 hours east. Owen called him once. Craig had 2 kids of his own, a mortgage he was already behind on, and a wife who'd made her feelings about Owen's situation clear the last time he'd needed help, 2 years prior, for reasons Craig never fully explained, but Owen understood. He hung up before Craig answered. He drove the F-150 to the Canadian Tire lot, left it there. He had nowhere else to put it, and walked back to the apartment with Bryn. They stayed 3 more nights while Owen called every transitional housing number he could find for the Sudbury area. The Lionel E. MacLeod Center had a 14-week wait list. The Wekadong Lodge couldn't take families. The YWCA had 1 family unit and it was occupied. The 211 Ontario line gave him a list of 4 numbers. He called all 4. 1 was disconnected. 2 went to voicemail. The 4th told him emergency family shelter was first come, first served, and he should arrive before 7 in the morning. He arrived at 6:45. There were already 8 people ahead of him. By 7:30, the available spaces were gone. On the last day of the month, the landlord changed the locks while Owen and Bryn were at the library. They came back at 4 in the afternoon to find the key that didn't work. Owen stood outside the door with 2 duffel bags, a backpack, and his daughter, and did the math on what he had left, $40 in his wallet. The apartment had no heat left to miss. The library had been warmer. He called his ex-wife from the hallway. The call went to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. He walked Bryn to the Tim Hortons on Paris Street and bought her a hot chocolate and himself a medium coffee, and sat across from her at a corner table while the dinner rush moved around them. She held her cup with both hands and looked out the window at the parking lot. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment, choosing. "Where are we sleeping tonight?" Owen looked at his coffee. "I'm working on it." She nodded. She didn't push. At 11 years old, she had learned that her father's "I'm working on it" was not dismissal. It was the sound of a man doing the only thing he knew how to do, which was not stop. They spent the first 3 nights in the Tim Hortons parking lot in what Owen thought of as the logical corner. Close enough to the drive-through lights to feel less exposed, far enough from the entrance to avoid attention. He reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go. Bryn took the back, curled under his old Carhartt jacket, and her own hoodie, her backpack, as a pillow. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask how long. On the first night, she reached over the headrest and put her hand on his shoulder for a few seconds before she lay back down. No words. Just that. Owen didn't sleep the first night. He watched the parking lot. He checked the locks every 40 minutes. He watched a man in a pickup circle twice at 2 in the morning and felt something cold move through him that wasn't the temperature. The second night, the temperature dropped to -7. Owen had one blanket in the truck, a fleece throw that had lived behind the back seat for years. He handed it back to Bryn, tucked it around her the way she was small again, the way she'd been small when she fit across his whole arm. He sat in the driver's seat in his work jacket and 2 flannels and let the cold settle into him slowly, the way cold does in northern Ontario when there's nowhere to go, through your boots and up through your legs and into your chest until breathing starts to cost something. He did not take the blanket back. In the morning, Bryn looked at him with the eyes she used when she was calculating something she didn't want to say. "You were cold," she said. "I was fine." She looked at him. She knew he was lying. She let him have it. He dropped her at the Tom Davies Square Public Library on Elgin Street at 8:30 each morning. He gave her his phone and a granola bar and instructions to stay in the children's section and not talk to adults she didn't know, and to text him with someone else's phone if anything felt wrong. "You're in charge," he told her, kneeling down so they were eye level, the way he'd done since she was 7. "You stay inside. I'll be back by 5. Bryn took the granola bar. She looked at him seriously, the way she looked at instruction manuals. "I know, Dad." He found day labor through a contractor on Regent Street. Cash work, clearing and hauling for a property remediation project near the old Inco smelter site. $30 an hour, under the table, no guarantee of hours. He worked every day they would take him. He came back smelling like diesel and cold clay and found Bryn in the same chair in the children's section every evening, a different book in her lap, Isaiah. His sister's name for her composure that he'd always thought of as a gift, but now recognized as a cost. "How was your day?" she asked. "Like they were at home." "Good," he said. Like they were. The fourth night, a security guard knocked on the driver's window at 1:30 in the morning. Owen woke up reaching for the door handle. The guard was young, maybe 25, with the look of someone who didn't want to be having the conversation he was about to have. "Sir, you can't stay here overnight. Tim's policy." Owen looked at the back seat. Bryn had not moved. "My daughter's asleep," he said quietly. The guard looked at the back seat. Something crossed his face. He stood there for a moment longer than the policy required. Then he said, "I can give you until 2. You need to be out by 2. Owen nodded. He drove at 1:55 in the morning through downtown Sudbury, past the closed restaurants and the empty bus stops and the rock cuts that rose up on either side of the highway like the city had been built inside a wound in the Canadian Shield. He found a church parking lot on Mackenzie Street. The sign out front read, "St. Andrew's United. All souls, all welcome." He pulled in and parked under the single light on the side of the building. From the passenger seat, a voice, small, awake. "Dad?" She'd been awake the whole time. "I know," he said. "Where are we?" "Somewhere safe." Bryn was quiet. Then, okay. She hadn't said it's fine. She hadn't said don't worry. She had said okay, which was what she said when she was accepting information she hadn't asked for and didn't want. Owen reached back and found her hand in the dark and held it for a moment. He let go first because she was supposed to be the one being taken care of. The fifth night, the truck ran out of gas 2 blocks from the church. Owen had spent his last $12 on a jar of peanut butter, a box of crackers, and 2 apples from the Foodland on Notre Dame. He had not bought gas because gas meant Bryn didn't eat, and that was not a version of math he was willing to do. He got out of the truck. He looked at the distance. He went to the back of the truck, braced his hands on the tailgate, and started pushing. A diesel F-150 half, loaded with their remaining belongings, weighs close to 3,000 kilograms. Owen was 6 feet and 185 pounds after 11 years of physical work. He pushed anyway. He heard the passenger door open. Bryn came around to the back of the truck. She was wearing her hoodie over her pajamas and her runners with the laces still untied. She pressed both hands against the tailgate beside his. Owen looked at her. She looked straight ahead at the block they had to cover. "Don't argue with me," she said. He didn't. They pushed the truck together in silence down a residential street in Sudbury at 11:30 at night. It took 9 minutes to reach the church lot. When they put the truck in park, Bryn walked back around to the passenger side and climbed in without saying a word. Owen stood at the back of the truck for a moment in the dark, hands on the cold metal, chest heaving, and thought about all the ways he had failed to not arrive at this moment. Then he got in and drove, because there was enough of a slope that the truck could coast the last 20 meters, and parked and sat. "Dad," Bryn said from the back seat. "Yeah, we're going to be okay." He didn't say anything. He couldn't say anything, because she was 11 years old, and she should not have to tell him that. She should not have to carry him. That was not her job. That had never been her job, and somewhere along the way, in the quiet and the cold, she had picked it up anyway, the way children do when there is nothing left to carry it but them. Owen pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He sat like that for a long time. Night 6. He made 3 phone calls. The first was to Service Canada, which told him his EI claim had been processed, but the first payment wouldn't arrive for 11 more days. The second was to a transitional housing coordinator who told him the waitlist had grown and to call back in January. The third was to Laurel. She answered on the second ring. Owen. She sounded like she'd been expecting the call for a while. He told her, quickly, without the parts that would make her feel guilty. Just the outline. The layoff, the truck, the apartment, the week. His voice was steady because making it unsteady was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. Silence on the line. Then quietly, Laurel said, "I want to help. I have a couch, but I'm in Kelowna, Owen. I can't get you there, and I can't." She stopped. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. If I had money to send, I would. I have $43 until Friday." It wasn't cruelty. It was the honesty of a person who was barely staying above water, telling another person who was drowning that she couldn't pull him out without going under. Owen told her Bryn was fine. He told her they'd figure it out. He hung up. Bryn was asleep, or close to it. Owen sat in the driver's seat and looked out at St. Andrew's parking lot and the amber light on the side of the building and the snow that had started coming down in thin, unconvinced flakes, the kind that can't decide whether to commit. He cried without making a sound. There was no other way. He couldn't let Bryn hear it, so he cried the way he had learned to do things alone, with full control over the external, the internal going wherever it needed to go without being allowed an audience. His jaw tight. His breathing long and regulated. His hands flat on his thighs. He cried for 12 minutes. Then he stopped. He checked the locks. He checked the mirrors. He checked Bryn. Still asleep. Still breathing. Still safe. In 18 hours, someone would knock on his window. Owen didn't know that. He only knew what he'd known for 6 nights. That he was invisible to a system that had no room for a man who didn't fit the available boxes, and that tomorrow he would get up and find day work and buy gas and come back for his daughter and not stop, because not stopping was the only thing he still knew how to do without instruction. 400 kilometers south, in a condo on the 28th floor of a building overlooking Lake Ontario in Toronto. A woman named Vera Nkemderim sat at her kitchen counter at midnight reading a coroner's report she had already read 40 times. She was 51 years old. She had spent 22 years as a licensed social worker, the last 14 as executive director of Threshold Housing Coalition, a nonprofit operating 6 transitional housing facilities across northern and central Ontario. She had overseen the construction of 2 new family shelters in the past decade, written 3 provincial policy briefs on housing insecurity, testified before a legislative committee, and appeared on CBC twice. She had been called an advocate. She had been called relentless. She had been called, by one Conservative MPP, a professional problem finder. None of it had been enough. 11 months ago, a man named Garrett. She didn't use his last name in her head anymore. She'd learned that from 22 years of this work, first names only, or they stayed with you too long, had been found in his vehicle in a parking lot in North Bay. He had been sleeping in his car for 3 weeks after losing his job at a paper mill. He was 48. He had no children, no family in the province, and a housing file that had moved through the wait list 6 weeks too slowly. He died on a Tuesday night of exposure. The temperature had been -16. Vera had known about Garrett's file. Not personally, she had 6 facilities and 63 staff and more files than any individual human could hold. But she had known, in the aggregate, systematic way that program directors know things, that the northern waitlists were too long, the emergency beds were too few, and the gap between system acknowledges you exist and system puts a roof over your head was still wide enough for a person to fall through and not be found for 3 days. She had known. She had written about it. She had testified about it. She had not changed it fast enough. The coroner's report said, hypothermia secondary to environmental exposure. It said nothing about a paper mill. It said nothing about a wait list. It said nothing about a system that was designed to catch people, but caught them the way a net catches fish, imperfectly, with gaps, and sometimes not at all. Vera had built her career on the architecture of safety. She was good at architecture. She was good at systems and frameworks and funding applications and stakeholder meetings. She had learned, over 2 decades, how to talk about suffering at a level of abstraction that kept the work moving without the weight of it crushing you in your chair. And then Garrett died in his car in a parking lot in North Bay, and the architecture started to feel like it was somebody else's building. Her daughter, Mira, was 31. She was a registered nurse at Sunnybrook Health Sciences. She had her mother's directness and her father's. Vera's ex-husband's quality of stillness, the ability to be fully present in a room without filling it. She had told Vera once, over coffee at Vera's kitchen counter where they had most of their real conversations, "Mum, you're very good at helping systems. I'm not sure you're very good at helping people." It was not said unkindly. Mira was not unkind. She said difficult things the way a nurse does, because not saying them is a different kind of harm. Vera had not argued. She had refilled her coffee and looked out at the lake. Mira was in Dublin now, 9 months into a travel nursing contract. They spoke every Sunday. 2 weeks ago, Mira had asked how Vera was sleeping. Vera had told her fine. Mira had been quiet in the way she was quiet when she was deciding not to argue. The Sudbury trip was supposed to be a site visit. Vera flew into Sudbury on a Tuesday evening to review Threshold's newest family facility, a converted motel on Elm Street that had been retrofitted into 22 transitional units. The project had taken 3 years and 4 funding cycles to build. She had approved every line item from her desk in Toronto. She had not visited once. Her program manager, Felix Okonkwo, picked her up at the airport in the organization's fleet car, a gray Civic, and drove east toward downtown. Vera sat in the passenger seat reading emails on her phone. Sudbury's landscape moved past her unregistered. The Canadian Shield rock cuts, the Boreal Edge, the church parking lots. They finished the site review at 9. Vera wanted to go straight to the hotel. Felix said he needed gas and turned onto Mackenzie Street. He pulled into an Esso station and got out to pump. Then he stood at the pump for a moment longer than necessary, looking across the street. A truck was parked in the church lot across from them, old F-150, Ontario plates. The windows were fogged. Thick, uniform condensation across every pane, the kind that forms when people have been inside a vehicle for hours, breathing against cold glass. Felix had worked in transitional housing intake for 11 years. He knew that fog. He walked across the street slowly. The lot was dark except for the amber light on the church wall. He could see shapes through the condensation. In the driver's seat, a large figure, still arms crossed. In the back, smaller, one shape, a child. Felix stopped beside the driver's window. He stood still for a moment. Then he knocked, twice, carefully. The figure in the driver's seat moved fast, hand going to the door, body turning toward the back seat. Felix took one step back, raised both hands, palms out. He waited. The window went down an inch. A man looked out, mid-40s, face weathered in the particular way of men who work outside in Canadian winters. His eyes were exhausted but not gone, the eyes of someone running on something other than sleep. "I'm not causing problems," Owen said immediately. Automatic. The same sentence he'd given the Tim Hortons guard 4 nights ago. Felix kept his hands up. "How long?" he asked. Owen's jaw tightened. 6 nights, he said. Felix looked toward the back seat. One shape. Small. "Is that your child?" A long pause. "My daughter." Felix nodded once. He turned around and walked back across the street. Owen watched him go. He had expected nothing else. People looked, people left. That was the pattern. He had learned the pattern well. Felix walked to the Civic. Vera had looked up from her phone when Felix had crossed the street. She was watching from the passenger window. Felix opened the driver's door and leaned in. "There's a man in that truck," he said, his voice level. "Daughter in the back seat. He's in work clothes. He's been out there 6 nights." Vera's hand went still on her phone. She didn't look up immediately. Felix waited. Vera looked up. Her face showed nothing. 22 years of keeping reactions off the surface. "How old is the daughter?" "Can't tell. Young." Vera looked at the truck across the street, the fogged windows, the amber light. A building she had built and never entered was 4 kilometers from where she was sitting. A man and his daughter were on the other side of those windows breathing cold air, and her program manager had just handed her information. She had been arranging her life not to receive directly. She thought about Garrett. Not the file. The man, 48 years old. Paper mill, parking lot in North Bay. 3 weeks, -16. She thought about Mira. "Mom, you're very good at helping systems. I'm not sure you're very good at helping people." She thought about 22 years of reports, and frameworks and frameworks and reports. Vera opened her door. The November air hit her immediately. Cold and mineral, the particular smell of Sudbury in late autumn, rock dust and boreal, and the coming winter that doesn't ask permission. Her dress shoes, Italian leather, touched asphalt that was cracked and fasalted and nothing like her office floor. She crossed the street. Felix stayed. This was hers. She reached the truck. She stood where Felix had stood. She could hear breathing through the window. She looked at the fogged glass and raised her hand, and then she stopped. Mira's voice, clear and direct as always. "Mom, you have to show up." Not to the system, to the person. She knocked. Owen's face appeared again, different this time. Not just fear and reflex, but the particular weariness of someone who has now been approached twice in the same night and is running out of space to be suspicious. He opened the window the same inch. Vera didn't introduce herself by title. She didn't mention threshold or the board or the provincial funding. She said the thing that was true and required no credential. "My program manager told me about you. Can I ask you something?" She paused. "When did you last sleep somewhere with a door?" Owen stared at her. Whatever he'd been braced for, another instruction to move, another well-meaning stranger offering a hotline number. It wasn't that. 8 nights ago, he said. Vera nodded. She didn't say "I'm sorry" because she had learned that saying "I'm sorry" to a person in front of you was sometimes just a way of managing your own discomfort. Instead, she said, "I run transitional housing in this province. There's a family unit at the Elm Street facility 3 kilometers from here. It became available this morning. I have the authority to place you tonight if you're willing. Owen looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Because a man died in a parking lot in North Bay 11 months ago, and I knew his file was too far down the wait list, and I didn't move fast enough. She held his gaze. And because my daughter told me a long time ago that I was very good at helping systems and not very good at helping people, I'm trying to be better at the second thing. Owen was quiet. A long quiet. The truck ticked in the cold. From the back seat, a small rustling. My daughter, he said. She's 11. She comes first. Whatever this is, she comes first. Of course, Vera said. How do I know this is real? Vera reached into her coat and pulled out her wallet. She took out a business card and a second card, her threshold ID, with her photo and the organization logo. She held both at the window edge. You can call the facility right now and verify my name. The number's on the card. I'll stand here while you do it. Owen looked at the cards. He looked at the back seat, then a sound from behind him, a small damp cough. Bryn. Not a big cough, the wet sound of a child whose lungs had been breathing cold air longer than they should have been. Owen's hand moved. He took the cards. His fingers were rough and cold, and when they brushed Vera's hand, she felt the temperature in them, like a data point she hadn't wanted to receive. Proof of something she'd been building systems to address for 22 years, and had never felt directly until now. My daughter comes first, he said again. Not to Vera, to himself. The only principle that hadn't bent in 8 nights. I know, Vera said. That's why I knocked. Owen started the engine. It caught on the second try. He pulled out of the church slowly, following the route on Vera's phone that Felix had texted over. Vera walked back to the Civic. Felix was already in the driver's seat, engine running. He didn't say anything when she got in. After a minute, she said quietly, "Call ahead. Tell them to, father and daughter." Felix made the call. They drove in silence. The Elm Street facility had been a Comfort Inn before Threshold acquired it in 2021. The renovation had taken 14 months. 22 units, each with its own bathroom, a small kitchen nook, a window. The lobby smelled like industrial cleaner and something cooking in the communal kitchen down the hall. A television played low in the family common room. On the wall above the reception desk, a poster. Housing is a human right. Owen pulled into the lot at 11:40 p.m. He sat in the truck for 4 minutes before turning off the engine. He looked at the building. He looked at his hands on the steering wheel. He looked in the rearview mirror. Bryn was awake. She'd been awake for the last 20 minutes, lying still in the back seat the way she lay still when she was listening to the world around her and deciding what it meant. "Dad," she said. "Is this real?" "I think so." She sat up. She looked at the building through the rear window. It has lights on inside. Like someone's home. Owen swallowed. He got out. He opened the back door and Bryn climbed out, her backpack over one shoulder, her hoodie zipped to the chin. She stood in the parking lot and looked at the building with the evaluating eyes she used for everything. Books, instruction manuals, adults who said things that didn't add up. Then she took his hand, not because she needed to, because she'd decided to. They walked inside together. The night intake coordinator, a man named Percy, who had the unhurried warmth of someone who had been doing this long enough not to need to perform it, found their room assignment without fuss. Second floor. Unit 14. He handed Owen 2 key cards and a small folder with information he said could wait until morning. The room was at the end of a carpeted hallway. Owen opened the door. 2 beds. A radiator that was already running, pushing warm air through the room in a low, steady hiss. A window with a curtain. A bathroom with a door that locked. A small table with 2 chairs. A ceiling light and a lamp on the bedside table that could be turned low. Bryn walked in first. She stood in the middle of the room. She turned around slowly, all the way around, looking at everything. The walls. The window. The 2 beds with their institutional white duvets. The radiator. Then she sat down on the edge of the nearest bed. She put her palms flat on the surface, pressing them into the mattress the way you press your hand against something to test if it's solid. She looked at Owen. "Dad," she said. Her voice broke. Just slightly. Barely enough to be called breaking. But Owen had been listening to her voice for 11 years, and he heard every register it had. He sat down beside her. He put his arm around her. She pressed her face into his shoulder, and he felt her shoulders move, once, twice, the small controlled shaking of a child who had been very, very brave for 8 consecutive nights and had finally found a room where she didn't need to be. He held her. He didn't say it's okay. He didn't say don't cry. He just held on, the way he should have been able to hold on all week, and let her feel something without having to manage it. They sat there on the edge of the bed together, the radiator moving warm air through every corner of the room until Bryn's breathing slowed, and she lifted her head and wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, businesslike the way she did everything. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. She lay down without changing clothes. She was asleep in 8 minutes. The fastest she'd fallen asleep in 8 nights. Owen sat in the chair by the window. He looked out at the parking lot where his truck sat. He looked at the room. He looked at his daughter in the bed, her face finally loose the way a sleeping child's face is supposed to be, all the holding finally released. He called Felix. Felix picked up immediately. "She's asleep," Owen said. "Good, Felix, get some rest. Vera will come by in the morning." Owen set down his phone. He sat in the chair by the window for a long time before he could bring himself to lie down. When he did, the bed was the kind of firm, plain, institutional mattress that most people would call ordinary, and it was the most comfortable thing Owen Darcy had felt in 8 nights. Vera arrived at 8 the next morning with 2 coffees from a place on Elgin Street and a bag with muffins from the Tim Hortons bakery, which was either ironic or appropriate, and she had decided it was appropriate. Owen opened the door in yesterday's clothes. Bryn was sitting at the small table with her backpack open, already working on what appeared to be a math worksheet, though no school had assigned it. She looked up at Vera with the measuring eyes. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Vera said. "You must be Bryn." "Yes." A pause. "Felix told you." "Felix told me." Bryn considered this. "Okay." Owen took the coffee with both hands. He stood at the window and held it close to his face and breathed the steam, and something in his posture shifted, just slightly. Not transformed, not healed, but straighter. The posture of a man who had slept horizontal for the first time in over a week. They sat at the small table while Bryn worked on her math, headphones in with a single earbud out so she could listen. Owen told Vera everything. The layoff, the truck, the apartment, the math that didn't work, the Tim Hortons parking lot, the guard, the church lot, the truck running out of gas, pushing it with Bryn at 11:30 at night, the shelters that were full, Laurel in Kelowna, the brother he hadn't called. He told it plainly, without performance or self-pity, the way a man gives a statement to someone he has decided to trust, which is differently from the way a man tells a story. It's more like accounting. When he was done, Vera set down her coffee. "I'm going to tell you what I can offer," she said, "and then you can decide. The unit is available for 60 days. No charge for the first 30. That's emergency allocation. Sliding scale after that based on income. There's a job board in the common room. Felix can connect you with 2 contractors in the Sudbury area who hire heavy equipment operators with Class B licensing and experience. You have both." Owen looked at his coffee. "Bryn," Vera continued, "can access in-facility tutoring 3 afternoons a week. There's also a group here for kids her age who've been through transitions. She doesn't have to go. It's available." Bryn was very still at the table, listening. Owen nodded once. Then, "Why?" Vera looked at him. "Because a man died in his vehicle in a parking lot last winter because the wait list was 14 weeks long and nobody crossed the street." She paused. "Because I've been directing housing services in this province for 14 years, and I realized this year that I had been extremely good at understanding the problem from a distance and extremely unprepared for what it felt like to stand in front of it." Owen met her eyes. "Your daughter." Vera looked up. He'd heard her say it outside the window. "She's in Dublin. Nursing. Is she why you came across the street?" Vera was quiet for a moment. "She's why I finally listened to what I already knew." Bryn set down her pencil. She turned around in her chair. She looked at Vera with the steady, unsentimental eyes of an 11-year-old who has spent 8 nights in a truck and come out of it with opinions. "Are you going to help other people after us?" she asked. Vera looked at her. "Yes, how?" Vera paused. "That's actually a very good question." "I know," Bryn said. She turned back to her math. The contractor Felix connected Owen with was a civil construction company operating on a Highway 69 expansion project south of Sudbury. They needed Class B operators with experience on articulated haulers. Owen had 7 years of it. He started the following Monday, $31.15 an hour, full benefits after 90 days. He called Craig on day 2 of the new job. Not to ask for anything, just to call. Craig answered, and Owen told him briefly what had happened. And Craig was quiet for a long time and then said, "I didn't know it had gotten that bad." And Owen said, "I know. I didn't tell anyone." Neither of them said the things that should have been said years ago, because they were men and brothers and it had been a long time. But Owen called. That was the start of something. He paid rent at the sliding scale from week 4, full rate from week 8. Bryn went to the kids' group twice. The first time she came back and said nothing. The second time she came back and said that there was a girl there named Simone. He recognized the name because it was in the binder of facility names Felix had given him, who had never seen Lake Huron and whose favorite book was the same as Bryn's. Owen drove them both to Espanola on a Saturday in December, so Simone could see the river. He didn't tell anyone he did it. He just did it. Vera flew back to Toronto on the Wednesday morning after the site visit. She went directly to her office and requested a full review of the Northern Ontario Emergency Family Bed Inventory, not to report it upward, but to understand it herself. She sat with it for 2 days. Then she called her program managers in Sudbury, Timmins, North Bay, and Sault Ste. Marie, not for a quarterly update, but to ask a question she had not thought to ask before. "What does it feel like on intake night when there are no beds?" they told her. She listened. She took notes. She submitted a proposal to the Provincial Housing Ministry 4 weeks later. Not another framework, a specific, funded request. 6 additional family emergency units across 3 northern sites, staffed 24 hours with direct intake authority for field staff. She attached a data table and 3 case summaries. She did not name anyone. She had learned to keep names. The proposal was approved in part. 3 units, 2 sites, funding for 1 year pending review. It was not enough. It was never enough. She had learned to sit with that without letting it stop her. She called Mira on Sunday as always. Mira asked how the Sudbury visit had gone. Vera was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I crossed a street." A pause. Then Mira said, quietly, "Yeah?" "I knocked on a window." Another pause. "Mum." Mira's voice had something in it that Vera hadn't heard in a long time. "How did that feel?" Vera looked out at Lake Ontario, the winter light flat across the gray water. "Like I'd been doing the work from very far away," she said, "and I finally came in close enough to feel the temperature." Mira was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was full of something it didn't usually hold when they talked about the work. "That's what I've been waiting for you to say." They talked for 2 hours that Sunday. Not about policy, not about programs. About Garrett and the parking lot in North Bay and what it was to know something in your head for 20 years and learn it in your body, in a church parking lot in Sudbury in November. About what the distance between architecture and presence actually costs. About Mira coming home in the spring. Owen drove to work on a Tuesday morning in early December. The sun was just coming up over the rock cuts south of Sudbury, the sky a flat white blue with the particular quality of Northern Ontario winter mornings, bright and unforgiving and clean. The radio played low, something he didn't know, something that sounded like someone had written it for a room where one person was listening. He took Mackenzie Street. He passed the Esso station. He slowed at the church parking lot. A car sat alone in the far corner. A small sedan, silver, one taillight out. The windows were fogged on every pane, the same thick condensation he had made himself for 8 nights running. Owen pulled over, turned off his engine. He sat there for a moment with both hands on the wheel. He thought about Felix standing at the pump, turning to look. He thought about Vera raising her hands, palms open, stepping back from the window. He thought about her asking the only question that hadn't felt like procedure. When did you last sleep somewhere with a door? He thought about Bryn pushing a truck down a residential street in her pajamas and saying, "Don't argue with me." He thought about Simone seeing a river for the first time in December. Owen opened the door. He stepped out into the cold. His steel-toed boots were solid on the asphalt. His jacket was warm. His name tag from the Highway 69 site was still clipped to his chest from yesterday. He walked across the parking lot. His breath came out in white clouds that disappeared behind him as he went. He reached the car. He could see shapes through the fogged windows. He could hear the shallow, careful breathing of people trying to take up as little space as possible in the cold. He raised his hand. He knocked. Kindness is not a gift that diminishes when you pass it on. It compounds. CJ knocked on Tamara's window. Tamara knocked on the next one. Vera Inkemdarim crossed a street in November, and Owen Darcy learned what it meant to be seen by someone who showed up in person, not on a letterhead. And on a Tuesday morning in December, Owen walked across a church parking lot and raised his hand to a fogged window, and the chain that had started God knows how many winters ago, in God knows how many parking lots continued, because that is what chains do when the people holding them refuse to let go.